Hello and welcome to my review of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. This one surprised me a bit as I think it flew under a lot of people's radar, or at least it did mine. And that was because of the controversy stirred up by Marvel's Avengers that came out a year prior. But Guardians of the Galaxy is strictly a single-player experience, free from any microtransactions, and it's still sold poorly according to Square Enix. But does that mean it's a bad game? Let's find out.
The commander has no time to meet with law-breaking pirates like you.
That's just it, we're not...
Based on Marvel's ragtag band of heroes, this group of Guardians resides in a completely different universe from the Avengers and the Spider-Man games, but still retains the witty humor and colorful personalities of their theatrical counterparts. But unfortunately, they're broke, and their first mission is to be not broke, so their brilliant plan is to capture an exotic creature to sell to Lady Hellbender. Of course, when things go south, they'll be up to their necks in their usual antics. Built using the Dawn engine, the same engine used for the Deus Ex series, Guardians of the Galaxy looks phenomenal. The first mission will take you to the quarantine zone, but you'll get to visit many different places. Each world you set foot on is original and visually striking, with unique alien fauna and flora. Ray tracing does add some reflective goodness, but the game still looks good even without it. Of course, if you do utilize ray tracing, then you'll take a performance hit, so it's up to you if you think it's worth it. In between missions, you'll spend some time in the Milano, and even though the ship is pretty small, the interior was really cool. Each member had their own room, and all the collectibles you find will be stored here. Character models also looked really good, even if they are different from the ones we know. Actually, I'd prefer not to look at Chris Pratt's face during every cutscene, so I think it's better this way. Motion capture was also very good. It wasn't perfect, but for the amount of dialogue in this game, it's hard to complain. The game only suffers from minor technical issues that can be fixed with a quick restart. The pathing AI will occasionally shove characters into places they don't belong, and using elevators may transform characters into jittery shake weights. On PC, I experienced micro stutters when transitioning into cutscenes and even during cutscenes, but these don't persist during gameplay, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Still, most of the technical issues were minor, so the game ran smoothly for the most part. And as you can see from the footage, the game looks fantastic, but that's not what stood out to me. The thing that really hooked me was the music. It might not be the most important thing in a majority of games, but the music really adds that je ne sais quoi, and for Guardians of the Galaxy, it was integral to the experience. The moment A Flock of Seagulls I Ran started playing, it was game over. I was under its spell. I had succumbed to the auditory drugs of new wave and synth pop, eyes glazed over with a huge smile on my face. Of course, the 80s offered a wide range of sounds, so if you're a fan of 80s music, or really have a hankering for nostalgia, then this will hit the spot. Eidos Montreal and Square Enix spared no expense and licensed over 24 songs for its track list, in addition to creating its own music.
I am Groot.
Come for the music, stay for the voice acting. If the music was bait, then the acting and dialogue was what really kept me playing. I loved the banter between crew members and their interactions with other characters.
Quill, the sword lady's being creepy again!
On the ship, during missions, and even in the middle of a firefight, these people just can't seem to help but poke fun at each other. One minor criticism I had was when there was a segment that lasted longer than it should have, where Rocket becomes pretty unlikable. But after they dialed it back, all was back to normal. The lively atmosphere really helped sell this game. With or without your participation, the crew members would often have their own side conversations that felt genuine. It made it feel like they had their own private life and personality because they weren't always exclusively talking to you. The mix of wit, humor, and generally taking the piss out of one another just made it so much fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously and leans heavily on the comedy, but there were heartfelt moments too. If you enjoyed the first two Guardians of the Galaxy films, then this will be very similar. As you make your way through the galaxy, you'll get to see all sorts of worlds and get into all sorts of trouble. Level design was pretty linear, and traversal was pretty straightforward, but at least they were visually interesting. There are a few hidden paths that lead to collectibles, but it's certainly not open world. You'll have to overcome some simple puzzles that may require you to command your crew members. For example, Drax can lift heavy objects, Gamora can cut things with her sword, Rocket can crawl into tight spaces, and Groot can create bridges. The controls for moving around handles as you would expect. However, the controls during combat had some issues, which we'll discuss later. Because the levels are quite linear, there's nothing really special about the traversal in Guardians. You'll get to see some really interesting locations, but exploration is limited. Ultimately, it's just a means to get you to the next cutscene. Throughout your playthrough, you can find collectibles and crafting materials. Collectibles can come in the form of new outfits for each crew member, written logs, or special items. These items can unlock special conversations with crew members back on the ship. If you ever feel like you missed something, you can always go back and replay any previously completed chapter. Any experience you've gained can also be spent to learn new abilities in the rudimentary skill tree. Each member will only have 4 unlockable skills, so there's not much to discuss there. Crafting materials that you find can also be used at a workbench to enhance your equipment. The crafting system is also pretty basic, and if you're diligent, you can easily unlock all the upgrades well before the game ends. But speaking of cutscenes, another thing that surprised me was the quality of the story.
We are in the place between hard rocks.
You mean a rock and a hard place?
That is what I said.
It starts off as a fun adventure following the Guardians' scheme to make money and their run-in with the Nova Corps, but it becomes much more than that. Character interactions were deeper than expected, and if you obtained collectibles, the extra dialogue unlocked a lot of backstory. If you are looking for a more serious take on the Guardians, I would say this doesn't go too heavily in that direction, but still offers a compelling narrative with sincere moments, while keeping the overall tone light and upbeat. Dialogue choices during missions don't affect how the overall narrative plays out, but provides a bit of variation to how chapters unfold. While the banter is great, story events will ground the characters that make them relatable, as the story turns to focus more about family. Funny enough, I actually didn't even like it that much at first. Initially, I didn't think it was very funny, but it didn't take long for me to end up loving all the characters. By the end of the first chapter, I was all in, and by the end of the game, I was pleasantly surprised by the story and storytelling. It was funny, well written, and well paced. It was masterfully done. I've left this till the end, but how was the combat? I have mixed feelings about it, but let's begin with the positives. At the start, combat is relatively simple. You have your blasters, which will deal damage, and if you damage an enemy enough, it'll leave them staggered for a short time. You'll also have some movement abilities to maneuver around and dodge enemy attacks. As you upgrade your equipment, acquire new skills, and progress the story, elemental properties and new abilities will be unlocked, adding a whole new dimension to combat. Some or all members may join you during missions, and while they are computer controlled, you will have the ability to command them to use one of their unique skills on cooldown. And if you've built up enough momentum, you can perform a special team move. However, they can be pinned down if overwhelmed. If that ever happens, you can initiate a team huddle. During this mid-battle pep talk, you'll try to inspire your crew with the speech. The choice you make will determine who gets attack bonuses. Regardless of your choice though, all allies will be revived. As you progress through the story, combat encounters will become more and more hectic, with greater enemy numbers and tougher opponents. The controls were okay, but they weren't the best in combat because of the sheer number of things you can do, and the mini armies you have to contend with sometimes. While it was really fun fighting as Star-Lord and commanding all 4 of your crew members at one time, it was also a bit unwieldy. Don't get me wrong though, I'm really glad they put this in because everyone had their own cool attacks and style. However, the controls for the ship are actually unusable with the mouse. Even after setting the sensitivity to the lowest it can go in-game, it still felt like 200% sensitivity. It was so bad I had to use keyboard-only controls. Thankfully, you only ever pilot the ship for battle a couple times. Adding to the list of negatives are the enemy encounters. After you've unlocked all the skills and abilities, combat encounters start to feel the same after a while, just in greater numbers. And sadly enough, boss fight mechanics were also not the most interesting. The bosses themselves were really cool characters, but mechanically they felt like normal enemies with larger health pools. In my opinion, combat does get a little stale towards the end, but thankfully this game isn't too long. By the time I started to grow weary of combat, I was well and truly enamored with the story, charmed by the acting, and still jamming to the music. As a genuine and pleasant surprise, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy delivers a fantastic experience. But sadly, the negative criticisms of Marvel's Avengers that came out a year prior almost certainly had bigger implications. So despite being available on most major platforms, sales numbers for Guardians of the Galaxy were disappointingly low, which was probably just one of many reasons leading to the shocking sell-off of Eidos Montreal the following year alongside Crystal Dynamics. Which is a shame because Guardians of the Galaxy is actually a very good game, and deserved to do so much better. The story wasn't nearly as shallow as I was expecting, but in fact was very good, providing a great balance of humor and heartfelt moments. The humor is a major selling point, as there aren't many games with an atmosphere quite like this. The top-notch voice acting was complemented by a well-written script, so the dialogue and banter always felt natural. With tracks like I Ran by A Flock of Seagulls and Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley, it's a nice collection of some of the 80s top hits. However, coming in as a slight disappointment, I think traversal and combat weren't the most interesting, but it did help keep the game moving at a steady pace. It was still decent, and it certainly wasn't bad by any means. And all of this was set in a stunning and imaginative universe, very different from our own, so being able to see unique worlds was a delight. So if you're looking for a game that blends together a great narrative, good humor, and awesome music, then Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is a game I highly recommend. As always, thank you so much for watching. How was your experience playing Guardians of the Galaxy? And if you haven't tried it yet, are you now interested? And are there any games that are similar to this in terms of its humor and overall feel? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, see ya.